Okay, we are live officially a few minutes late, but thanks to LinkedIn and whatever bugginess they have in their platform, we figured it out. All right, so thank you all for joining. Boyan here from Hyper. Uh, today we're going to be discussing about identity security at scale and mostly about how organizations are still reactive even in 2026. And so a lot of the statistics and numbers that you're going to see in this presentation today come from our state of passwordless identity assurance report that just came out the previous week. In generating that report, the Hyper team and our partners uh, worked to interview about 950 IT security decision makers and practitioners to come up with these numbers and statistics that you're going to see that we'll be sharing today. There's a lot more information and much more granular, in-depth statistics and numbers in the actual report, which we'll link to whenever we post this. So be sure to check it out. And today I am pleased to announce Carla, who's joining me today. So Carla, please introduce yourself to the folks who are listening today and watching this. And I'm very excited to have you on board.
Thanks, Boyan. Hi, everyone. I'm Carla Roncato. I'm the Vice President of Product at Hyper, and I am on a mission to make the world rid of passwords. So I'm
Mhm.
so excited to be here to talk about the state of passwordless and identity assurance.
Thank you, Carla, and welcome to Hyper, and
Thank
welcome
you.
to these things that we do. We try to do this once a month to just keep everybody up to date on the latest happenings around identity, and we try to talk about things that actually matter and things that we think will move the needle for our industry. So first things first, AI. We just came back from RSA,
Sure did.
and it was 5,000 companies talking about AI. So let's talk about what AI means to us here in the identity space and how some of the folks that we've spoken to, the 950 people, when we ask them about AI, how they are affected and how it's changing their approach to their day to day.
Exactly. I mean, certainly we saw a lot of confusion on the RSA floor for customers and investors and organizations alike, probably even governments. But here you can see from the statistic that it's really prevalent already that 87% of organizations experienced a deep fake attack, whether that be through audio or video, impersonation, holding up paper, fake documents, whatever it may be. So again, like the report really teases out the scope and magnitude of the problem. And we're not really surprised. These tools are as much about accelerating productivity for all of us as information workers, but the adversaries are absolutely leveraging these tools at a much rapid pace.
Yeah, for sure. And we've seen the usage of AI completely overcoming language barriers that hackers have traditionally
Right.
had. We've seen them overcoming a lot of the open source intelligence hurdles associated with identity-based attacks because that open source intelligence used to take hours or days or weeks sometimes, and now it takes moments, and it can happen 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's really interesting to see how um, you know AI-driven tactics were really the biggest change in the threat landscape for organizations, and we're seeing it. Pretty much every single phishing email now is a spear phishing email because
Yeah.
AI is really, really good at doing the things it needs to do, such as creating very compelling, relevant, and timely messages to get people to click links and ultimately provide their credentials or sensitive company data.
Yeah, exactly. It's easier than ever to trick everyday users and workforce users. And worst of all is these tools are very, very rapid and quick. And so if you're not paying attention, you may actually think that you're the one that is prompting some
Yep.
of these things to happen if you're an active AI user. So who isn't? So in addition to already, those of us all adopting these tools in our everyday life, we're also experiencing them at a rapid pace from these adversarial campaigns.
That's right.
And
So
the
let's
consequences are big. Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about how, companies are like once hackers are kind of already in, right? Once they figure out once the AI creates the right email with the right context that that person clicks and they fall for typing in a credential or accepting a push notification, or when an AI calls an IT help desk and tricks the very kind person on the other end of the line who just wants to help to give away credentials to a highly privileged employee, and then the hackers use those credentials to get into the system. Let's talk about, kind of what happens at that point.
Yeah, so here's exactly it. So last year, CrowdStrike had a report that it was about 51 minutes for a breakout to occur. And it's just like what you said, Boy. And it's from the point at which they've made that first one credential that has been compromised, how they're able to pivot and very quickly get lateral access or elevation of privilege. Now that breakout time is 29 minutes. So that's an increase, of a significant factor in terms of time. And so you can imagine this conversation next year could be even another 50%, if not more, in terms of breakout time. And the other scary piece is that the fastest breakout time is only 27 seconds. And so that is essentially near real time. And the other component to this is how quickly these credentials can now end up in the dark web for sale, for example. So it's not just enough for this adversary to get in and ruin your company and have network access and be able to potentially ransom you. They can also collect all of your credentials and have a second successful sale in terms of how they've essentially financially benefited from your data.
Yeah, that's right. And it's insane, the fact that it's mere seconds in many of these instances where, somebody typing in a password into a field that looks just like the Microsoft login field, and they accept a push notification in their Microsoft Authenticator app. Um, Minute or seconds after that, there is data being exfiltrated from their OneDrive accounts, from their email, from all these other things that are connected. Because for decades now, we've been focusing on integrating all of our enterprise tools behind a single point of entry, which is single sign-on. And when that authentication into those systems is easily phishable, then we see these situations happening, right? So hackers have, gone down the point of least resistance, which is the credential and the human, and now we're here, right? And yeah,
Exactly.
and it's interesting that in a lot of these instances, even when an identity attack is detected, it can be many hours or sometimes even many days before an organization actually does something about it.
Yeah,
And this is particularly the case when they start to suspect that they have a imposter indoors. So if somebody has, trick has onboarded as an employee and then kind of given their credentials to somebody else to do their job for them, uh, you know, getting that person out of the organization, unless there
yeah,
is just absolute clear-cut 100% evidence, can take sometimes days, weeks, or months.
absolutely. That's absolutely the case.
So I really like this next term we're going to talk about. And it's something that I haven't heard much before, but it's given that it's almost April, I think it's it's a very timely term, which is what we're referring to as the hindsight tax. So Carla, can you tell us about the hindsight tax and
Absolutely.
how that has an impact on companies?
So while, organizations, we can share all of this information with you about what's happening in the threat landscape and what the adversaries can do, and the fact that they can do these, adversary in the middle kind of techniques, and they have all these tools available to them. The hindsight tax really speaks to the organization's reaction to this situation, ransomed, for example, or a deep fake that they've experienced. Whatever the scenario is that really is an indicator of a breach, or the tactics and techniques that are used, we can set that aside for a moment. Let's just make the assumed there was the breach. So here's where you're really getting the bad news. The bad news is that 59% of organizations increase their security investment only. It should be a big only in this one after a breach. And that is why we called this particular talk around, you really can't be in this reactive state. You have to start pivoting more to forward and really protect these credentials and your users, because if not you, then who? The users aren't going to do it for themselves. They don't have the choice to go, I would like a high assurance credential and a high assurance identity verification process. But when you give it to them and they go through that process, they feel secure, your organization's secure, and we don't have to talk about this with organizations going forward. And so similarly, it's the same thing here, is they also realize that you can't just reissue a new set of credentials after the breach, because how do you know that you have properly evicted the bad actor? You don't. And many of the ways to get them back, that they can get back in, they actually left the scaffolding. So we kind of call it scaffolding when they've left, back doors is another word that is often used. So pairing your sort of recovery, if you will, and your restoration and back to resiliency. Again, waiting until after the breach. That 60% of organizations increase their spend on identity verification and MFA only after impact. Again, these are very reactive. This is very reactive behavior as opposed to being a proactive approach, so that you actually avoid the breach altogether and minimize that attack surface.
Yeah, it's amazing. In our industry, there's this entire term called a post-breach CISO, which is
Right.
the CISO that gets hired after a breach at a company. And it's not like they didn't have a CISO before, they did. And
Yeah,
99% of the time, that CISO was sitting there screaming from the mountaintops, we need to do these things, and we're just being
exactly.
ignored. And then after something happens, the board of directors feel like they have to do something. So, you know,
And
who better to have a resume generating event than the
exactly.
chief scapegoat officer, right?
I would also say, I mean, great, cyber insurance is great, but do you really need your underwriter to tell you to increase your spend in security as a result of a breach as well? I'm like, do you really need your insurance company telling you how to spend, your organizational security budget? And that's the reality, is in order to even get reinsured, you have to make these investments. So why not do that at the point of insurance, so that you can actually lower your cybersecurity policy premiums up front? It pays for itself. There's evidence that it pays for itself. And if if we could just get folks to really think about their business in those terms, in addition, like the economic impact of doing the right thing first, you benefit from a lower policy, so your premiums go down. There's no excuse to not doing this.
Yeah, so let's talk about one of the key controls that are growing in the last 12 months for organizations, something that companies are reacting to in a massive way, and that is social engineering of their help desk, social engineering or social engineering or impersonation type of attacks for their onboarding process. And this is really around identity verification of employees. So many of us have been through experiences on our mobile devices and such, our favorite mobile apps, like if you sign up for a Lime scooter when you go somewhere, before you do so, it'll ask you to scan your driver's license to make sure that your identity is verified type of thing. Um, but those checks are typically just to prevent fraud. But on the workforce side, the collateral damage or the downstream effects can be much more catastrophic, right? And we saw this with like the striker scenario very recently, where massive parts of infrastructure of many companies were taken offline completely, and they were kind of dead in the water because of this. So let's talk about identity verification and how companies are thinking about that.
Yeah. So if you think about onboarding, the beauty of onboarding is that it has become quite efficient. You can use tools to order and drop ship machines, even if they're in the office. You have all these capabilities to sort of deliver that great day one new employee experience. Part of the challenge is, how do you know that you really shipped the laptop to the right person? the right address, and that it's actually the person on day zero, day one that is starting that machine up. The days of sending the password as a sticky note inside of the lid of the machine are gone for all the reasons we've already talked about. There's absolutely nothing secure about doing that. And secondarily, starting your onboarding journey with a password just says, "Hey, fish me." So, so let's not do that. I would like to be a fished employee on day one. So, what we really want to see organizations thinking about is the sort of an onboarding experience to really ensure that they start with a strong proofing. And you have to do it anyways if you're a new employee for authorization of work anyways. So coupling this onboarding experience with something that is required practice anyways is just smart. It's efficient. So if we've made so many efficiencies delivering the machine, we can also have these efficiencies in onboarding the real employee. So it's this is the good news part, is that 65% of organizations now use some form of identity verification, but we absolutely need them to use it combined with passwordless. But even more than that, it needs to be in the actual journey of the onboarding experience. So I'll pause there for a moment, Boyan, and get your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I was talking to a security leader, a new security leader at a company recently, and he'd only been there a couple months. And there was somebody else from their team in the room that had been there for like 18 years at this company. And I asked the new security leader at the company, like, "Hey, what was your onboarding experience like?" And he, rolled his eyes, he leaned back in his chair, he mumbled some choice curse words under his breath, and then he went into the the flow of that he had to go through as a new employee at this organization. And then the guy that had been there for 18 years next to him said, "Oh, that's exactly the process I went through when I joined 18 years ago."
See?
We're like, oh, geez. So in that time, the mobile transformation happened, the cloud
I was just
transformation
gonna
happened, the
say,
AI transformation is
yeah,
happening, and the corporate system for onboarding employees is exactly the same. And,
yeah,
and so I think it's what a lot of these new attacks and attack vectors are really forcing organizations to do is rethink how they're doing identity verification. But uh, one of the unfortunate points is that many times, even though security teams or IT teams might make these tools available, the other departments are slow to use them,
right.
which is I think where we have a lot of room for improvement on the vendor
Agreed.
side to help our customers with adoption of this type of stuff, but also, on the practitioner side, how do we make sure that these things aren't an afterthought, or how do we position it in such a way so that it isn't optional?
That's right. And so here where you see that 25% of IDV only being deployed to like less than a quarter of employees, that's often a triggered event. It may be for account recovery reasons, but why
Mhm.
wait till account recovery to introduce IDV only? It's a great time to do it to prove the value to the organization that you're really securing the back door. and that's often what the adversaries will pursue, is all the mechanisms in which knowledge base and social information and trickery and urgency can really go after it. So it's one of the most favorite places to do it, but it's woefully insufficient to just focus there, because if you really introduce this process in the beginning of the worker's journey, by the time they have an account recovery, whether they got a new phone, lost their device, something happened, whatever it happens to be, because that's life. It's great to introduce them to this process so they're comfortable with it, but also it's familiar and in such a way in that they understand that it's also a secure ceremony, if you will.
Yeah, so let's talk about the other side of the coin a little bit. So I'm holding a dollar here, and when we think about identity security, especially on the user side, we think about two sides of the same coin. And so we just spent some time talking about one side of the coin, which is identity verification. When you're issuing a credential or onboarding somebody, you really want to make sure it's them. Now let's talk about the other side of the coin, which is the credential that they use to access your systems every day. And at most companies these days, that is still the password, unfortunately. Right? So
Unfortunately.
If you have a bulletproof verification and onboarding system, good for you.
Right.
Um, Only 25% of you are actually using it for anything, unfortunately. But um, on the other side of it is once you do verify somebody and issue them a credential, how do you make sure that that credential isn't phishable, isn't shareable,
Right.
all those things that are key to ensure that organizations aren't breached. So this is where we need to talk about passwordless. So Carla,
Indeed.
take it away around some numbers on passwords.
So, again, bad news, but boy, here we are 50 years later, still talking about passwords. 76% of organizations still rely on passwords, right? Usernames and passwords, the weakest link. We talk about it all the time in terms of the chain. And what this stat really says, if you're one of these organizations, is you're 100% phishable. I mean, you should just have a phishability score that you put in front. If you're the CISO, if you have a seat at the table, and you're having conversations about what your identity strategy is, you should just put 100% phishable score on your presentations to your board, because that is the reality. It doesn't matter if you have 2% of passwords in the organization, you are still 100% phishable as far as the adversary is concerned. So I'm being a bit bullish on that one, but it's still true because it only takes one credential, as the striker attack proves
Yeah, so
again.
so one of the fun things, given that RSA just happened this week, so I just I just pulled up this article here, and it's pulling a bit of an audible on this presentation. But this is an article from CNET in 2004, February 2004. So 22 years ago, if my math is right. Um, and
I love it.
I was a senior in high school, so there's that. But
I think I
but
worked at Microsoft then.
at this junction, I remember I watched this video multiple times, but Bill Gates got on stage at RSA and he gave this big speech. I think it was the keynote or something similar, where um, predicted the death of passwords. Microsoft moved to this approach. Just like Microsoft moved to Windows Hello for Business or whatever a few years ago
Yeah,
approach. Um, some things repeat themselves, and unfortunately
indeed.
they stay the same. Um, but Bill Gates predicted the imminent death of the password in 2004, and here we are, 22 years later, and still 76% of organizations use them. So that's kind of a
I
problem.
wish it had been a commitment instead of a prediction, because where would we be if in fact it had been a commitment? There were no OKRs back then. So,
Yeah, I mean,
this would be a big fail on that OKR, by the way. So if we actually measured ourselves by those predictions.
yeah, the interesting thing is 43% of companies have deployed passwordless.
Right.
And so, but what that really means is that even though they have some passwordless capabilities
Right.
available to their employees, they still allow the password to be used.
There's a
And
fallback, or
yeah,
there's going to be some additional identity stores and applications that have not been addressed. And that's absolutely the problem. Again, that's why I'm saying there's still 100% phishable score for those organizations as far as I'm concerned.
that's right. Yeah. And so if you but one of the cool things is 28% plan to deploy passkeys within the next 2 years. But again, I think the
That
exact
number's
same
too
thing will
low. Like,
happen.
shame on them. It should be a much higher number.
Yeah, but I have a feeling even once they do deploy passwords, guess what?
Right.
Or passkeys, the password will still be
Right.
available to the user. And this is where,
Yeah.
we really believe that in order to get to a state where passwords are eliminated, you have to have broad enough coverage to actually get rid of the password everywhere. So jumping into some of our advice for practitioners based on all these numbers here, um, the way that we look at it with our customers is an organization is only as strong as its weakest link. And so where we typically see companies really needing to address these weak links is in their primary points of access. So primary points of access for most employees at companies are, they log into their computers, and then once they log into their computers, they access their applications, right? Whether they're cloud apps, on-prem apps, VPNs, whatever else. But kind of hinting at the previous slide and how many organizations have actually deployed passwordless technologies, 40 something percent of companies have actually deployed something like Windows Hello for logging into your computer, or Touch ID if you have some Macs laying around. Typically at organizations, it's the most highly opinionated and most highly paid users who tend to have MacBooks, whether they're executives or your most prized folks in engineering. Um, they're the ones who tend to have the most opinions as well. So these passwordless options are available, and Windows Hello is a secure method. It's good, but there are so many use cases where it just doesn't work. And so what do users do at that point? They type in their password. And so as long as that password option is available, that's the weak link. And then guess what? We see this happen all the time. They're an employee at a company. They get their computer, they sign up, they set up their Windows Hello. They're using it for a month, two. Then they run into a scenario where it doesn't work. And then they go to type in their password. But oh crap, they haven't typed their password in 2 months. And
Exactly.
they don't know it. So what do? They try it a few times and they get locked out.
Yep.
And then what do?
Call
They, fi-
support.
they pick up the phone, right? They pick up the phone and they call their help desk, and they answer some basic questions like, hey, what street did you grow up on? What's your employee ID number? What's your manager's name? And help desk is there to help. And that's
Or the
that's
help
how
desk bot
hackers,
is. It could be a
yeah,
bot of the future. It's going to do whatever you ask it for.
that's right. Yeah, and on the application side, companies probably have something deployed like a Windows, like a Microsoft Authenticator or Okta Verify or Duo. All these things work the same, where they send you a nice little push notification that's super easy for you to accept whether you mean to or not. Um, and then hopefully nobody's using SMS anymore, but many still are. And then again, if you get a new phone, if you lose your phone and you need to get into the system, you need to set up your MFA. It's back to the support desk, right? So all these social engineering attacks and vulnerabilities exist at the help desk, and with passwords, the phishing vulnerabilities exist. And as we've seen in the statistics that we addressed throughout this presentation, AI is supercharging the bypass of these things.
Absolutely.
So what do you do about it? So,
Instead,
so what we've seen work really well for customers is, still use Windows Hello if it's available to you, if it's capability that is reasonable for a subset of your users. But how do you make sure that your alternative methods of authentication, your fallback methods of authentications are not phishable? And so this is where the HYPR app is obviously, and I'm biased, a great example of something that stops these types of attacks, because the HYPR app doesn't do push notifications. You have a user initiated login flow. And for your users uh, who maybe don't want to use a phone or can't use a phone, or maybe you just want this as an additional alternative, which is terrific, you can use something like a hardware security key, like a YubiKey. And we have partnerships with our friends at Yubico, for example, where when you ship your YubiKey, you can securely bootstrap it and all this type of stuff. So there's a lot of integrations built in there. And then what we've built is a very high assurance credential reset process that is self-service, so that we can verify a user's identity uh, and securely bootstrap a new credential. So those two sides of that coin, without having to go through a help desk. And so we've actually even seen some of our customers go to the help desk and take away the ability for them to reissue a credential. And the help desk loves that, right? Because
Yeah.
30, 40% of their calls are because of credentials. So the help desk loves being able to say like, hey, instead of me sitting here and telling you a password over the phone, why don't you go to this link, follow this self-service process to verify yourself, and um, and then you'll be issued a new credential.
And speaking of like the two sides of the same coin, if you only had $1 to spend and you've made the decision as a large organization to outsource your help desk to any one of the service providers that can provide you this kind of help desk support, you've already thought about reducing your costs around help desk in particular, but you now can reduce your risk. One, and you're actually spending that dollar much smarter. You're not spending it on, again, these manual processes. Even if there's technologies in there, you're actually eliminating the help desk as the risk as well. So when you spend your $1 wisely, you actually get 2x the benefit potentially, in addition to all the other things we talked about reducing your cybersecurity policy premiums. Like there's really, again, no excuse to not spend this money wisely in such a way that you're also reducing your risk and your attack surface.
Well said, Carla. So that's what we wanted to cover with everybody today. Again, I would encourage you to go and download the report, check it out, read it. If you have any questions, reach out to us
Call
anytime. We're
us.
here. Call us, yeah, email us, send a carrier pigeon or smoke signals, whatever, and
Yes.
we'll be in touch with you. Um, Thank you for joining me today, Carla. Welcome to
It
HYPR
was
again,
it was a
and
blast.
thank you all for listening.
Thanks, everybody.